There's several questions from the audience that were directed to you. Okay. I would like to ask you these questions before you do leave. Okay. This one says, Mr. Cordray, there's a report that came out about your time as a federal director for the CFPB that black workers were regulated to an alarming, I can't read that writing, then it says the plantation and received numerous discrimination complaints. How do you respond to such troubling allegations?
Yeah, that's wrong. When I was head of the Consumer Bureau in Washington, we set up the agency and we had 38% minority employment and tremendous leadership positions that were filled by minority individuals, including my general counsel, my head of enforcement, who helped us bring back the $12 billion and put it back in people's pockets, and my head of fair lending. We took fair lending cases against the big banks around the country for redlining. You know what redlining is, where they refuse to lend into certain communities, African American and Latino communities. And we took hundreds of millions of dollars off of them and put it back into the communities because they were refusing to lend. We also brought reverse redlining cases where they make worse loans into minority communities, loans that are not sustainable, the kinds of things that brought us the financial crisis. That was part of my work there. By the time we finished and I left to come back and got into this governor's race, we had the lowest number of discrimination complaints of any agency in the federal government. And I had the strong support in those efforts from Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who you may know is the fiercest person in the United States about making sure that we stop discrimination in lending and employment and in the workplace. And I was supported strongly in those efforts by Wade Henderson, the former head of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, by Hillary Shelton, the head of the NAACP in Washington, D.C., and by Jesse Jackson, who had me come and spend time with him at his PUSH coalition last summer. We also are going to have the National Urban League in Columbus this year, and I hope many of you will attend. Mark Morial, who heads that, is a good friend of mine, came and spoke to all of our employees at the Bureau because we did stand for fairness in the workplace and for fairness in fair lending and for making sure that the discrimination laws in the credit world were being enforced by our Bureau. And we took a lot of heat and a lot of criticism for that, but I'm proud of that work and I wear their criticism as a badge of honor. Thank you.
Now, this next question, again, is to you, Mr. Cordray, but it's the same question that I'd like to pose to the other members as well. And do you support an assault weapons ban?
So we have put forward, I think, the strongest and most comprehensive proposal on reducing gun violence in our society. I'm a parent. We have twins. They're both teenagers, and we feel strongly the need to keep our schools safe and keep our children safe. But I want to say that this issue is broader than just one proposal or another. It's not simply about assault weapons. It's about reducing gun violence in our society. And people who are paying a lot of attention to certain crimes committed in certain places ought to be paying attention to all the drive-by shootings and gang violence in our communities that they have ignored for far too long. And there have been thousands of people killed by handguns during this period. Now, our proposal has three things. First of all, it includes tightening the gun laws in specific respects that I know are opposed by the NRA, but they're the right thing to do, and we will pursue those things and we will fight for them. Second, it involves a school safety plan, much in line with what law enforcement thinks will help strengthen our schools with school resource officers. And third, things that I can do as governor, working with local law enforcement to reduce gang violence with guns on our streets and to reduce crimes committed with guns on our streets. This will save lives. This is part of a broader, comprehensive package to address the gun violence in our urban communities as well as elsewhere, and it is what we will fight for. I have never been funded by the NRA in any of our campaigns, any of my campaigns, and I will not be this time. I know that they oppose some of the measures I put forward, but I've always stood up strongly to special interests of whatever kind. That's why President Obama made me the head of the Consumer Bureau to take on the powerful big banks and financial companies across this country. And we fought them, and we stood up to them on your behalf and on the behalf of people of Ohio and across this country, and that is always how I have conducted myself in public office. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe, would you like to give us your opinion of a potential potential ban on assault weapons?
Yeah, to answer the question, the answer is yes. But I think we need to first work on some things that we can do immediately in the State House. You know, this past week I testified, I was the first legislator to put out a comprehensive gun reform package to start invest in our local schools, give local schools the flexibility to spend the money they want in order to keep the kids safe. 2, red flags bill. I just testified on it this week. Basically, it says if there's a dangerous situation at home, family or law enforcement can petition the court, temporarily seize the firearms for 14 days. Not just for school shootings, but for suicides, for domestic violence, for all the different violent acts that people are taking at home, right? So that's the second piece. The third piece is closing that gun show loophole. There's no reason you should be able to go to a gun show, not have to go through the background check, and buy these guns. And at the end of the day, we have to invest millions of dollars in mental health so that we can deal with these mental health issues, because that is oftentimes the root of the problem. So I do support the ban of certain assault weapons, but in the meantime, I'm realistic about the legislature that I work in, and I'm pushing these sensible gun control measures to this week and moving forward.
Thank you. Team Kucinich.
The ban on assault weapons is an issue in this election, and you can't gloss over it. When dozens of people can be killed with one weapon, which are weapons of war, and 5 states have already banned such weapons, it is an issue whether or not someone who's running for governor of Ohio wants to ban assault weapons. Now, who's trying to block that? The NRA. Now, this F that I wear is my NRA grade. There are others up on this stage who have an A from the NRA, who have a B+ from the NRA. I have an F because I consistently oppose the NRA's agenda. We've got to be very clear here. It's easy to gloss over these things in the heat of an election. But the question is, who's going to support protecting those children in the schools who are, where parents are worried about what's going to happen if somebody comes in with an assault weapon? These are weapons of war. They ought to be taken off our streets. Period. And anyone who wants to be governor should be ready to say that.
I get the last 30 seconds. So, assault weapons ban, simple question, yes or no? Do you support it or you don't? That was the question. We support an assault weapons ban. One thing that we all need to understand is these drive-by shootings in the neighborhood, they're not being done with a pistol. They're being done with the same weapons that we continue to talk about. I know this because my parents still live in that neighborhood. I've lost friends in the neighborhood because of this weapon right here. It's a weapon of war. It has no business in our society. It does not protect your home, and you do not need it for hunting.
Thank you. Team O'Neill.
I'm a former Supreme Court justice. The NRA doesn't care about me, so I don't have a rating. When I ran for Congress in 10, they gave me an F, so that's okay, but that's not what this race is about. I think we have an opportunity today to see something about courage. Richard Cordray was just asked a direct question. Do you or do you not support an assault weapons ban? And he gave us politician talk about we got to get safe, we got to protect the kids, we got to do this. It's a yes or no question. It's a yes or no question. And sometimes as a judge, I've learned that you sometimes have to tell people what they don't want to hear. The Second Amendment gives people the right to bear arms. It's been there for 200 years. The United States Supreme Court is not going to change that in the foreseeable future. Does that mean that we all have to sit here and watch the carnage? Of course not. The right answer is that you cannot legally say, well, we've decided assault weapons are very unpopular and you can't have them anymore. But what the Supreme Court also said is that every one of us in this room have the right to implement reasonable regulations. So when we came up to this may shock you because it shocked me. I went to a chief of police in a small town of 4,000 people. And I said, Chief, how many assault weapons do we have in this town? And he said, I have no idea. And I said, that is so wrong. You're sending police officers into a house and you don't know if they have an assault weapon? I'm a nurse. The first thing you got to do is assess. Where's the problem? What's the number? What's the danger to all of us? So the O'Neill plan, I think, is pretty easy to understand. I say the Second Amendment does give you the right to bear arms, and the Second Amendment tells us we have the right to implement reasonable regulations. I'm a military officer. Here's my reasonable regulation. If you want to have an assault weapon, then you must go down to your local chief of police once a year and apply for a permit. Reasonable regulation requires registration. If we don't know where they are, we don't know how to stop them. Think of Florida. The O'Neill rule would have saved lives because that little monster was throwing chairs at his mother before he killed all those people. Under the O'Neill rule, in a call for domestic violence, the weapon would have been leaving the house with the chief of police. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Now, I realize this is really not a debate.
Ron, I was called out
I know,
personally.
I know.
I'd like to have a moment to respond.
I'm about to do that. This is not a debate, and I don't want to get into a back and forth between the candidates, but Judge O'Neill did mention Mr. Cordray by name, so I'll give you an opportunity to respond.
Okay. I thought my answer was clear. That is not part of my proposal, but I have a broader proposal to deal with the violence in our cities as well as the violence elsewhere in our society. And I think it is the most comprehensive, strongest proposal of any of these candidates. But Bill, don't talk to me about courage. Your Facebook post where you called out women that you had had relations with over years, including 2 that you mentioned by name, that you called out and described so that people knew exactly who they
Mr.
were.
Cordray.
That was sex shaming of
Mr.
the worst
Cordray.
kind, and it was cowardly.
Mr. Cordray.
Let me just
No,
quote
no, no,
Michelle
no,
Obama.
no,
When you
no,
go low, we go high.
no,
That's the only thing I can say.
No. What I'm about to say is to all of you candidates.
Yeah,
We're engaged in a civil conversation here, okay? Now, plenty of folks may have their own opinions, but we're talking about issues today, and we're going to keep it directed toward issues, okay?